Today we are taking our crack at the proverbial question that comes up all the time. What wood lathe should I buy? I'm ready to buy a lathe. I just got a whole bunch of Christmas money or holiday money. I can't wait to spend it. What lathe should I buy? Common answer number one. Buy the biggest, most expensive lathe you can buy. Because then you can turn little things on a big lathe. You can turn big things on a big lathe. But you can't turn big things on a little lathe. That's all true, but then again, big lathes more expensive. So I have heard other things. It's like, well, don't buy a cheap one because then you'll just use it and then upgrade and upgrade again. So take your money and get a good one. Well, that's true. Certainly, that's great. But what happens if you buy a whole bunch of stuff and start wood turning and decide you don't like it? Well, then you sell it all at a loss. So there you go. Hit the classified ads. Hit the Craigslist. Find a lathe that's used. There is things about a lathe that you need. All lathes can turn between centers, between the tailstock and the end. You put a little spur in here and a live center on the end, and you can turn spindle turning between centers, so they all can do that. So get a lathe that can do faceplate turning, and most all of them can do that, or you can get a faceplate very inexpensively. And a faceplate is something that screws on right here where this chuck is, and you can screw your bowl to it and turn it, and then turn it around and pressure fit it and turn the screw holes off and turn. The other thing you want to get for a lathe are accessories. So if you buy a less expensive lathe and your budget's say $1,000, you could spend $300 or $400 on a lathe, and the other $700 very easily on tools and accessories. One of the more important accessories to get is a chuck. This is a 4-jaw chuck with some pin jaws on it, which is awesome. You can turn pens and all kinds of stuff, spindle turning, and hold it and drill it with that. Or there's bigger 4-jaw chucks. There's chucks that have these pieces come off very quickly. The jaws come off very quickly. Or these, you have to screw them on and off. Or if you do what I did, you buy a chuck and a set of jaws and put them together and you're happy with it, and then next time you save another $200, you do that again. But the thing to consider when buying a lathe is the diameter. So this is 16 from the bed to the center of the spindle. 16 diameter, so it's 8 radius. So that's the 16 of the 42 on this lathe. So this is 16-inch diameter, 42 long. I've never turned anything longer than about 12 inches. So in my use, I'm not a big old spindle or ballaster turner or anything else like that. So I could have actually gone with a bowl type lathe, which gives you higher dimensions here and shorter here. They weigh less, they're more squatty, things like that. But one thing to really consider is on this tailstock what the threads are and what the taper is. The taper inside is what they call the Morris taper. And this one has a Morris 2 taper, and it's clearly just the dimension from here to here. A Morris 1 taper is narrower but the same taper. So small lathes have Morris 1 taper. The bigger lathes seem to all have the Morris 2 taper. So if you get a tiny mini lathe and start buying everything Morris 1 and then upgrade, you will be buying everything again. There's threads on here, so this has got a Morris taper inside it as well as the tailstock. But the threads on here are either 1 inch diameter by 8 threads per inch, or 1 1/8 by 8 threads per inch, and that's very common for just starting out lathes that are a little bigger all the way up to almost the monster ones. Some of the monster lathes have 1¼ by 8, but it's very, very common to have 1⅛ diameter by 8 threads. So I would certainly shop for something like that. The power of the motor helps, but absolutely more importantly than that, I would upgrade to an electronic speed control, variable speed control. And that's just purely for safety. Some of the other lathes have a Reeves drive in them, which will slow them down, but it won't go all the way to 0, and it won't go all the way up. Some of them have 3 or 4 belts in them, and you can just turn the motor on and you're at 300 RPM, or 600, or 800, or 1200. I'm a safety conscious, and so I really like the variable speed to be able to go down to nothing and to control it by like 20 RPM increments. And that really helps when you get big out of control things. So if you can swing it, get a variable speed. The motor size, 120 lathe like this, the 1642, it's got 120 volts, so it's a 3/4 horsepower something. They make them all the way up to 1½ and 3 horsepower. That helps in a lot of cases, but that's probably going to be your lathe you move up to. 120 works just fine for me. I very seldom stop it, although I can, and it's convenient to just move around and plug in anywhere. Even though my shop has 120 and I can easily wire 120, I just like, I guess, the convenience of it. So those are all the things to worry about. The tool rests, you can get different sizes. Generally your lathe will come with one. Different brands, people are really hot on the brands they've got. Some of them like this one and that one. If you get anything a little bit newer, like say the last 10 to 15 years, I think the brands are all pretty good. I don't think you need to worry too much about them. Some of the really old ones, super heavy duty, but then again, they might not have variable electronic speed, and they might not have the same threading and stuff. So I hope that helps answer the question, what lathe do you buy? Don't go necessarily by brand specifics. Go by size and what you think you might be doing with them, and then go with compatibility for the Morris 1 or 2 taper and the threads. So like you can get chucks. I have a lathe that's both. I have a lathe that's a smaller 1" here and 2" here, and with the chucks, that's not that big of a deal because you can buy this insert, which you buy when you buy the chuck, and this is 1/8 and inserts into the chuck here. If I wanted to put this chuck on my other lathe, I could take this off and do it that. But that's kind of a one-time thing. That's not something you're going to do all the time. So those are kind of my thoughts on buying a lathe. The bigger, the heavier, the more stable it's going to be when you're turning big things. You can also turn pens on a big lathe. You can turn pens on a tiny lathe. It's just what you want to do and how you want to learn. So I hope that kind of helps. Talk a little bit about what lathe to get, but not necessarily brand specific, but more just characteristics to really think about and talk about. So thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, and tell your mom.